Kia ora, Helen Brahms here, coming to you live from Surprise in Arizona. Hope you're having a super fantastic, sparkling day. Welcome to Before the Dirt Nap podcast number 1918, Thriving Thursday. And for those that celebrate Halloween, it is also Halloween, so I hope you all have a very safe evening out there trick-or-treating. We do not celebrate Halloween in this house, so just as an FYI. So I'm trying to make this quick and short because I have all the lights turned off out, but this office is at the front of the house. So lights could go between the blinds, and I want to make it look as dark as possible across the front of the house. But anyway, we're going to be talking, we're on Thriving Thursday today. And so what are we going to talk about on Thriving Thursday relating to genealogy? Wow. We're going to be talking about accomplishments that your ancestors have made, looking for accomplishments, looking for things that they did where they thrived. And looking to see what records could we look at to see how they got through some times. Did they make some accomplishments and things like that? So the first place we're going to look is land ownership and homesteading records, because owning land often signifies stability and success, and homestead applications or deeds may reveal how your ancestors established themselves in an area based on the size of the land that they had, how many employees did they have, how many people did they, a lot of places, if they had farming, they would often hire workers for the farm. So how many workers did they have? And those are noted on census reports as well. There are some census reports out there that will turn around and state, the size of their farm in acres. I'm thinking of the English records here right now. The size of the farm that they had in acreage and how many workers that they employed. Did they own the farm, or did they rent the farm and managed it? So there was also that question as well. So you can see by that how well they were doing at the time. Were they considered successful at that time? Were they considered, just poor farmers? You never know. You got to dig deeper. Explore occupational success. Check employment records, guild memberships, or business directories to see if they held respective positions or developed notable skills. Employment records will show you how far up into the company they go. Did they run the company? Were they the CFO? What today is considered a CFO, the chief financial officer. Or in those days, I guess it would be the accountant or the money counter, or I don't know. I haven't come across any of my ancestors that were bean counters or whatever they were. So check the employment records. Did they own the company? Were they employed by the company? And at what level of the company did they achieve before they left the company? Examine community involvement. Many ancestors thrived through active roles in their communities. Look for mentions in local newspapers, church records, civic records that show any type of social engagement. And you'll be able to tell this because sometimes they were put in there that, that there was a party held for Mr. and Mrs. at Mr. and Mrs. Bob, Mr. and Mrs. Smith's house. They had X number of guests show up. Among those guests were, and they may note the guests. And if you're looking in places where they had lords and ladies and dukes and duchesses and barons and baronesses, then they would be mentioned by title. So you could have a look at that as well. Seek out educational achievements, school records, university alumni lists, or mentions of scholarships can indicate educational advancement, especially if higher education was very rare in their time. And on some of the census reports, on the English ones as well as the US ones, it can show to how many years did you attend school. So have a look at the census reports too, because it will show you how many years did they, the longer they were at school, the better educated they became. Investigate military service and pensions. Veterans often receive benefits that help them thrive. Military records and pension applications can show how service impacted their quality of life. There was it after World War I or World War II, where land was given to returning GIs. So were they one of those returning GIs that got given some land? Were they officers? Were they non-commissioned, or were they commissioned? And you can go back and you can actually look at some of their records. Now, there are some records that are missing that they are in the process of, because there was a fire at the facility where all the military records are held, and they know exactly which files are missing because of the way the filing is done there. So, but, still go in and ask. You've got websites like fold3.com, which will look at military records, usually around the world, at different countries as well. But if you can look through. So Fold3 is a good place to go because they've got some documentation online based on the campaigns that they fought in. Did they receive any medals while they were in service? What did they receive their medals for? It's going to be another way to see accomplishments that were achieved. Check wills and probate records. Thriving ancestors often left detailed wills, and yes, they did, which may show accumulated wealth and property passed down to the next generation. Yes, they can. You can. There are the probate packets that you can find, and I know here in the US you'll have things in there like their wills. You will have letters from people who knew the person who had passed away. There will be any creditors that are putting a lien against the estate to make sure that they get paid. Those sorts of letters will be in there as well. You can often find some tidbits about genealogy in there as well, because who are they leaving things to? Who is the executor of the will? If you don't know the name, if it's a different family, it's like, how is that family related to the person who passed away? Or is that person a friend of the family, or is it a relative? Is it a brother, a sister? Actually, would have been a man in those days. Sorry about the brother-sister thing. Is it a brother? Is it an uncle? Is it a son who is the executor of the estate? Who is the executor of the estate? And who's been left what? Sometimes it will be the solicitor's office that's the executor of the estate, and it will list the people who are getting. Who are these people? If they're sometimes they will state, to my sons I leave. To my sons, and they'll name out the sons, I leave blah 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 blah. To my daughters, and they'll name out the daughters, and they'll leave blah 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 blah. So some of them are a little more detailed than others. Others just turn around and say, I am leaving everything to this particular person, and it may be their spouse, it may be a child. Unless it specifies in the will, you will have to go and have a look at that. But there's a lot of really good details that are available in the probate records. Review family stories and oral histories. Family tales often highlight success, entrepreneurial ventures, health, or survival through hard times, revealing the resilience that helped them thrive. This is why it is important to leave your story, to record your times, to record your life for future generations. You may not want to publish it out there, but you could, you can even do what Mark Twain did. Mark Twain turned around and said he did not want his autobiography published until he had been dead 100 years, because his thinking was, and he explained this all in his will, his thinking was that if he waited 100 years for his autobiography to be published, then everybody mentioned in there would also be dead. So they had no recourse to come back to him. So they had no recourse on anything he said in there. They couldn't dispute it. They couldn't argue about it. Nothing, because he'd already been dead 100 years, and he was 90 when he died. I think he was 90 when he died. I know he came in on Halley's Comet and he went out on Halley's Comet, and that was his wish to do that. And he said in one thing that he came in on Halley's Comet. What other weird and wacky things have they got in there that, for thriving? Mark Twain, he was born when Halley's Comet could be seen in the sky. And then in 1909, I think it was, I think he died in 1910, I think. In 1910, he mentioned that Halley's Comet was coming back the following year. And wouldn't it be good, because he came in on Halley's Comet, to go out on Halley's Comet? And that's what happened. He died the following year while Halley's Comet was in the sky. And I think he was 90. I'd have to go look that up. But, what other stories have been passed down through the generations with your families? Are you related to royals? Are you related to any celebrities? I just heard a weird noise outside. Who are you related to? Who is in your ancestral wheel your ancestral wheel? Do you have any authors? People who had did they have any books published? Library of Congress is full of books. I even have a book in the Library of Congress. Well, actually, I'm mentioned 2 times in a book in the Library of Congress for being on the Dean's List. When I was at the Northern Virginia Community College, I got on the Dean's List twice, and that book is in the Library of Congress. So you can find my name there. What other ancestors can you find your name at the Library of Congress? Do they have a book that's been published that is stored there? You can go to the archive. You should go to archive websites, and there's places where you can type in somebody's name and see what comes up. For the National Archives in New Zealand, I've been to their website a few times, and every now and again I'll throw one of the surnames in there that I'm researching in New Zealand and see what comes up. And it's been very interesting what has come up. There's been some things come up, and I've gone to my mum and dad and I go, do you guys know about this? And they've told me the story behind it. Some of them were a little sad, and some of them were like, no, I didn't know anything about that. Another family mystery. But, there's all sorts of different places that you can go and you can find records and to see what accomplishments that people made. If a museum or something has a database that you can search through, have a search through it. What was I watching? What was I watching? Oh, I was watching Who Do You Think You Are? And they had on their, what was his name? Gotta make sure I get the right person. Chris O'Donnell. Chris O'Donnell was on there. And he had, I think it was like his third great-grandfather, and he'd always had the sense of family. And his question that he wanted to see was, why did he have such a sense of family? Had it been passed down through generations, or was it just something that was just from his dad down? And he found, and through the genealogy research and everything else, they found these amazing stories of where he had great-grandfathers who had been fighting in a war and had left the war to go home because they were needed at home, and the people that they helped along the way. One of his great-great-great-grandfathers was actually at Fort McHenry in Baltimore when the British were bombarding Baltimore, and Francis Key Scott was out on one of the ships out there doing talks with the British, and that's the night that Francis Key Scott wrote the Star-Spangled Banner. And Chris O'Donnell's however many great-grandfathers was actually there at Fort McHenry. And when he was there, they were describing the scene of how the commander of the fort had issued the command that flag was not allowed to fall. And when the morning came, that flag was still standing, and there was a pile of bodies laying there holding this flag up because of the bombardment and everything else. And people weren't taking shelter. They were sacrificing their life to keep that flag flying. And Chris O'Donnell's however many great-grandfathers was one of the people that were there at Fort McHenry. I think he survived. Yeah, he survived that one. Then he had another, I think it was like third great-grandfather who was in the Civil War. And they took him to the Smithsonian Museum for this piece. And they had him put gloves on. And they actually gave him a letter that had been written by his third great-grandfather explaining that he had actually left his post. He had resigned his commission, left his post to go home to help the family out. Again, another sense of family. And he had forgotten to leave behind his sword and a couple of other bits and pieces that he was supposed to hand over when he resigned. And they were standing there with the sword. And so Chris O'Donnell got to hold the sword that his third great-grandfather fought with during the Civil War. So what other stories are out there? I mean, it's one of my favorite programs. Roadshow Genealogy, Who Do You Think You Are? English, American version, British version. I think there's a New Zealand version as well. There's a couple of shows in New Zealand that do with DNA, but I haven't been able to access them because you've got to be, tried to access one of them, but because I wasn't in New Zealand, I couldn't access them. So I'm looking forward next year to being able to access those particular shows because I will be in New Zealand. So I can't wait to do that because that's going to be talking about different, it's a kind of like a Who Do You Think You Are? And there's genetics come into it with DNA. It comes into genealogy comes into it with DNA and all that sort of stuff. So I'm kind of curious to see. I've heard about these two shows and I can't think of the name. I have them written down in my New Zealand notes. I've got a whole list of things going on for New Zealand for what I'll be able to watch when I get down there. And most of it's genealogy stuff. But yeah, being able to access that sort of stuff or see those programs when they air and things like that. So I'm looking forward to that. But these two programs, I think my mum told me about those programs. My mum or my sister-in-law. Maybe it was a cousin. It was one of my family members told me about these shows and I couldn't get to see them because it said that they were not available outside of New Zealand. It's like, darn. So yeah, there's some good things and some bad things about that. So that is all we have for you guys tonight. So the ways that you can find out about accomplishments is look into land ownership and homesteading records, explore occupational success, examine community involvement. Newspapers, great source for that. Seek out educational achievements. Oh, and I will tell you this: look at the wedding announcements as well, because a lot of time there's times when a full article will be in there stating who got married to whom, who they were the children of, where they were from, and then it will turn around and list who the maid of honor or matron of honor was, who the bridesmaids were, who the best man was, who the groomsmen were, who the ushers were. And when they're telling you this, they will tell you how they are related to the bride or the groom. And then it will list everybody that was in attendance. And it will describe the wedding dress. It will describe what the bridesmaids and the matron of honor were wearing. It will describe what the groom and the groomsmen were wearing. It gets very detailed and makes very interesting reading. And then it lists all of the people that were in attendance, and it will tell you where the reception was held, what church they got married in. There's just like almost every detail you could possibly think about a wedding is listed in these articles, if you can find. And the higher in society they were, the bigger the article. So that's another one that just popped into my head. So that's, let's see, seek out educational achievements, investigate military service and pensions, check wills and probate records, review family stories and oral histories, check places like the Library of Congress, National Archives, any archives that are in your area. Because sometimes you've got the National Archives, but then sometimes you may have a state archives, a county archives, even a city archives. They start big and go small. So you check out the archives that are available in your area, or if they're just a nationwide archives, check those out as well for any mentions. And sometimes there'll be mentions that were in obscure newspapers which aren't on a newspaper site like newspapers.com, or what's the other one I use is newspapers.com. There's Genealogy Bank. There's newspaperarchives.com. In New Zealand, it's passpapers.co.nz. Those are the only ones that I can think of off the top of my head. Check those out. When I'm going through the archives, I will find articles from magazines, because I haven't found a magazine archive site yet. So it could be some obscure article from some magazine that came out. I found articles in magazines that were on the National Archives. So check for anything. Look at those places. There's places that you can go on archival sites and you can type the person's name in. And if they're in their database there on the site, it will come up. It will tell you if it's a record that you can see online, if it's one that you actually have to be there in person to see. So I have a list. I have a list of records that I want to go and check out when I get home, when I get to New Zealand, once I get settled and everything else. But I have a list. I'm going to do like genealogy days or something and go to the National Archives and get these records pulled, or actually request that they be pulled and then arrange a day and time to go in to do that. Instead of just showing up and waiting, have everything ready to go when you get there. If there's records that they can, if you're going to some place like a historical society, a family search society, a building, library, archives, or anything like that, arrange ahead of time if you can. Let them know what day and time you're going to be there, and if they could have these particular records available for you to view at that day and time. A lot of places will actually appreciate that, instead of having a queue of people lining up going, well, we want to see this, we want to see that. And because it takes the archivist, may take the archivist a while to go and fetch those documents for you based on where in the facility that they are. Because some of them you might just be there at a counter, but they've got a whole building. You might be there in a room with tables and stuff. Big room, tables and chairs and all that sort of stuff that they bring you the record. They bring out the records to you. But behind them, they've got a whole entire huge building full of shelves and files and everything. And for them to go and look it up and file, it could take a while for them to walk there. So if you have and some places will not let you come in unless you have a time and have already provided in advance what it is you want to see. And so they can go pull those records for you. But have the courtesy to let them know what day and time you're coming in, and if it would be possible to see these particular records when you came in. And they will appreciate that. Okay, so with that, I am out of here. Going to go read some more of this halfway through. But I'll get it done by Saturday morning at 9 a.m. But we're reading Stillhouse Lake this month, and on Saturday morning we will be announcing what we're going to be reading in November for discussion in December. So with that, go check out the QR code up here to grab the copy of this book. It's good. It's good. Put it this way, I'm enjoying it and reading as much of it as I can. And I laid down on the couch this afternoon planning on having a nap, and Zeffie kind of gives me this weird look, and it's because I was actually reading a real book that she gave me this weird look. She kind of like looks at me, because usually I will lay there and I'll either read on my iPad or I'll read on my Kindle if I'm going to take a nap on the couch. And she looked at me really weird because I was actually holding a real book in my hands reading. So but with that, I'm out of here. Go out, have a super fantastic